This is All That's Left, a podcast from Left Voice. And today we're discussing abortion rights. 2 weeks ago, a leak from the Supreme Court confirmed what many of us already knew would happen. The Supreme Court is set to overturn Roe v. Wade and take away the federal right to an abortion. Justice Samuel Alito writes in the majority opinion, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. We must hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. This ruling comes as a part of a decision on the case Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health over a Mississippi law that bans any abortions taking place after 15 weeks after a pregnant person's last period. Nearly half of states already have strict abortion bans in place that would go into effect as soon as Roe is overruled. Even though we saw this coming, that doesn't change the anger, the rage, and the need for mobilization that millions of us feel. And in that sense, in the aftermath of the decision, there was a national day of action on Saturday, May 14th, which brought tens of thousands of people to the streets. That's the Saturday that you're going to hear us referring to in the podcast. So to discuss all of this, Left Voice sat down with abortion provider in New York City, Angelique Saavedra, who's also an El Paso native, to talk about the attacks on abortion rights and the way forward from a socialist feminist perspective. And before we get into it, if you like our content, please consider donating to Left Voice at patreon.com/leftvoice. We're an independent media funded by donations, meant to fight the whole capitalist system and bring you socialist feminist perspective and the voices of working class folks like Angelique. So please consider donating. So on that note, let's get started. Hi, Angelique. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey everyone, excited to be here with you.
To get us started, I wanted Angelique to talk a little bit about her own experiences. You know, she's, like I said, a healthcare worker, a nurse practitioner. Often we hear pro-lifers talking about, well, pro-lifers, by pro-life I mean, anti-abortion folks, talk about, how people can always give a child up for adoption, and they talk about adoption as an alternative. And so I think it's really important for Angelique to talk a little bit about her own experiences with adoption, with abortion, also from the perspective of a healthcare worker. So
I'll kind of go into my own story, just with the preface that I think that it shouldn't have to be where folks have to divulge their own personal experiences around their reproductive decisions. That should be a decision between themselves, their families, their healthcare worker, or their provider. And it sucks. We don't make folks, divulge their personal stories of why they are choosing other life-saving healthcare services. But obviously I'm very happy to just share my own stories, because I feel like that's also part of how we destigmatize such an important healthcare service. So yeah, when I was 20, I had an unintended pregnancy, and for very complicated reasons, I decided to place my child for adoption. And it was a very intense experience where I worked with an agency that was obviously, they are biased in that they are receiving money from adoptive parents. So they have every reason to help the adoptive parents to become parents. And, that involved a lot of misinformation about the realities of placing a child for adoption. When I was 20, I didn't really know that much about my options. I didn't know that much about abortions. When I searched on whatever search engine was available when I was 20, there wasn't a lot of positive information about abortion. And adoption was shown as this sort of heroic act of some sort of like courageous act of selflessness, providing this family who, wants to have a child but isn't able to do so for whatever reason, have a child is something that the adoption agency told me was going to be an amazing experience, and it was far from that. There was a lot of, after I signed signed my parental rights, relinquished my parental rights, I didn't receive much support. The adoptive parents that my kid currently has are actually really amazing, but I got lucky. I could have just as equally chosen adoptive parents who were not as kind, not as like considerate of my feelings as a biological mother. So I did get lucky in that sense. I don't have anything negative to say about my kids' adoptive parents, but just the system itself erases biological parents and the experience of biological parents. And also folks who are adopted. Like, we don't recognize the trauma of separation from biological parents. And instead of questioning why folks relinquish their parental rights, like what are the systemic reasons folks choose to say goodbye to their children, capitalism, unable to have the family support that they need, whatever it is in their specific situation, that's not acknowledged. It's a Band-Aid, and it's a very sad Band-Aid because it's there's so much. Adoption isn't just a one-time experience. It's something that changes throughout your lifetime. That was about 12, almost 13 years ago, and I am always adapting to the ever-changing realities of adoption as my kid grows older. And I like to keep my kid's privacy, so I won't say much about him, but things are always changing. He's about to be a teenager. He recently came out as trans, and luckily, like I said, his adoptive parents are amazing and very supportive. So that was my adoption experience. It was far from the magical promises that the adoption agency had made to me. I suffered through postpartum depression. I had suicidal ideation. And I was a very privileged person because I was also going to some good universities, and still I struggled with depression and mental health issues. So when I was 27 and starting graduate school to become a nurse and a nurse practitioner, I had an abortion. And it was such a different experience than the adoption experience. My abortion experience, I was lucky enough to have a really amazing doctor, and I had no suicidal ideation. It was just a very easy recovery. It was just I was able to move on with my life, it didn't have that sense of regret, will I ever wish to have raised my child. It was completely different. And I get that some folks do have experiences where they're sad about their abortion, and you should honor your experience and honor your feelings. But my experience was that it was less traumatic than going through 40 weeks of pregnancy and then giving birth and then having to relinquish my parental rights and say goodbye to my kid. That was so much more energy, physically, mentally, emotionally, all of those things, than a 5-minute procedure where the recovery was really quick. And, sure, it wasn't the most it wasn't an amazing experience. I don't think having other healthcare services like chemotherapy is an amazing experience, but it felt life-saving. It felt like this was what I need to do with my life in order to move forward.
Yeah, and I think, well, first off, thank you for sharing that. And I totally agree that, it really sucks that there's sort of this pressure to sort of justify one's healthcare decisions in order to, fight for abortion rights. And abortion should be a right, straight up, period. Like, and that's that. But I really do appreciate you sharing those stories, and I think it really highlights the way that adoption is not a substitute for abortion rights. Abortion rights are absolutely essential, essential healthcare, part of someone's healthcare. But I also wanted to kind of like highlight, like you mentioned that your kid is trans, and the same right-wingers who are coming after abortion rights are also coming after trans rights, or coming after, especially trans children, which is a particular kind of enraging. In Alabama, they recently made it a felony to provide trans youth with gender-affirming care. And that's absolutely infuriating. And I think that these discussions of abortion rights and of trans rights, and also more broadly LGBTQ rights that we've seen, the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, for example, I think these are really connected struggles. They're struggles for bodily autonomy. They're struggles for our bodies. And so I do see them as really connected. Like, how do you kind of see these two struggles?
It's really disturbing how these folks who, the GOP and other the Republican Party is, quote unquote pro-life until a kid comes out as queer or trans, and suddenly they don't want to offer gender affirming hormone therapy, which is life-saving. They want to force folks to give birth, but, don't have, formula to feed the babies that are going to be born. Not to mention the United States has a notoriously high number of maternal mortality for especially Black women and other women of color. But yeah, I think it just goes to show the hypocrisy that the Republican Party, and also the way that the Democrats are so complicit with all of this. I don't even really have words for it, because it's so heartbreaking, especially just knowing that there's kids in Alabama and Texas who need this care. I think that I just recently saw that the rates for the suicide rate, or just the folks considering suicide, trans youth, queer youth considering suicide, was really high. And not having access to these services is not pro-life. It's the opposite. Not having baby formula is not pro-life. Forcing women who are already struggling to put food on the table for their children is not pro-life. The amount of folks I personally see who have abortions, like as a healthcare provider, are actually mothers and have kids that they're trying to care for already. That's not pro-life. It's trying to control folks' bodies, trying to create more babies in order to, further their agenda, to have more workers. I don't know.
No, and along these lines, I think this discussion of, this far right that we've seen, that there's always been an evangelical Christian right that is anti-abortion. And they've been quite successful in the last 50 years in slowly eroding abortion rights, whether it be through, individual laws that create waiting periods, which make it much harder for working class people to get abortions. Shutting down abortion clinics, like there are more than 5 states where there's only one abortion clinic right now. Creating mandatory waiting periods for people under not people under 18, mandatory waiting periods in general, but also creating parental consent laws for people under 18. Like those are all ways that the right to an abortion has been slowly chipped away at, right? But now I think we're seeing that as Roe v. Wade seems to be poised to be overturned, it's, kind of a death blow to what we've already been seeing, this pattern we've already been seeing of Roe v. Wade being chipped away slowly but surely. So what are some of the effects? What are we going to see if Roe versus Wade actually gets overturned, as Alito's leaked document says that it will be? What's going to happen?
I mean, certainly we're already struggling with high maternal mortality rates, especially for Black women and women of color, as I said before. So I can definitely predict an increase in that. I believe there's also been some research around that. There's just going to be so many folks trying to find childcare, to obtain, to travel to other states if they can, if they are able to have the means or, find the resources that they need to go to other states, which I have had. I think I've had 2 or 3 patients coming from Texas to get their abortions in New York City. So, there's that. I think obviously this is going to put more working class folks at a disadvantage. You already hear folks talking about the struggles and having to divulge their own personal stories of their journeys just to get a basic healthcare service. Aspiration abortions, the first trimester takes 5-10 minutes max. It's not very long of a procedure. It's very safe. It's much safer than, giving birth full term. So it's just going to impact a lot of working class folks, queer folks, women, trans children who are overlooked, and trans folks who need abortions as well, especially as this movement continues to center cis white women. I think that there will continue to be folks who are not seen or heard, and it's going to be poor working class, folks of color.
Yeah, and also, there's going to be immediately, right away, 13 states have trigger laws. And people are saying that there's probably about 10 more states that are going to follow suit. So we're looking at almost half of the United States that won't have legal abortion.
Yep.
And so people are going to have to either travel for abortion, which, as we know, if, like you were mentioning, a lot of the folks who are actually getting abortions already have children. A lot are working class folks who are I actually can't afford to have another child. And actually, abortions, especially thanks to, and by thanks I mean that in a very sarcastic way, to the Hyde Amendment, which was passed by Jimmy Carter with the support of folks like Joe Biden, you can't use Medicaid for abortion. And actually, abortion is expensive. Having a baby is more expensive because we don't have free healthcare in this country. But, the folks who are going to suffer the most are working class folks of color, especially undocumented immigrants who, for whom travel is very difficult, sometimes impossible. They're the folks who are either going to go a lot, like really into debt in order to be able to get the basic healthcare that they need, or are going to may be forced to have illegal or unsafe procedures in the states that they live in. Mm-hmm. So this is an issue that is going to be a life or death issue, especially for the most poor, the undocumented folks, mm-hmm. working class folks of color. This is what is at stake in my opinion. And so it's bullshit when they say that they're pro-life. Mm-hmm. That's not true. If they were pro-life, then they would be in favor of free public health care, right? If they were mm-hmm. pro-life, then they would give the conditions for people to actually parent, which actually includes things like, providing childcare, free public childcare for folks. Yeah. It includes parental leave, mm-hmm. paid parental leave, which yep. should be multiple years. People should be getting parental leave. That, you want to talk about pro-life, like those are the things some very basic things, right? Like I could go on, right? That are needed for people to be able to parent. So I was wondering also, as like a healthcare provider, if you could talk a little bit about what you see as a healthcare provider around people's experiences, trying to parent, or what kind of experiences, or what do you see in your practice?
Yeah, so as an abortion provider, I have seen so many different folks getting abortions for so many different reasons. And, I think most of my patients are predominantly already mothers. And, they are trying to care for the kids that they currently have and support the kids that they currently have. These are mostly working mothers, working parents who don't have the luxury of trying to find childcare. So they'll, bring their kids to their appointments. I see immigrant communities where they, either they have documentation, they don't have documentation, but they are sobbing in my office because they don't feel like they can bring a kid into their current situation. And it is sad for them because they wish they could make a decision, but they don't feel like they would have the support if they were to bring a kid into this country. And they don't want to have their, to be sent back to their country if they do have a kid here, be separated from their children. So I definitely see a lot of that. And, I see teenagers who aren't ready to be parents, in addition to folks who don't have health care and who can't access birth control. And so I find that, I will spend a lot of my time trying to find coupons so that way they can, access abortion. And it's really sad because I feel like I didn't come into healthcare to perpetuate a system like a capitalist healthcare system, but oftentimes I'm very limited in what I can do if folks don't have access to healthcare. And it's very infuriating, to say the least, because everyone should have access to whatever healthcare that they need, including birth control. And abortion services, I think that those are predominantly the situations that come to mind. I've seen people traveling from far from other states, college students, and the further that they have to travel, oftentimes the further along they are. After 10 weeks in New York, you can't have a medication abortion, so then you need to have a surgical, an aspiration abortion. And although abortions are much safer than childbirth, the further along you are, having an abortion becomes more risky. So those are, I've seen a lot of different folks, mostly working class women of color, immigrants, Those are the folks that I predominantly serve as a healthcare provider.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's really important in, the way that Roe v. Wade was originally won was not because the Supreme Court was like nice,
Yeah.
It was because there was a feminist movement that demanded it. And, in 1970, for example, there was a massive protest in New York City with over 50,000 people. And they demanded things like free legal abortion. But not only that, they demanded free community-controlled childcare. They demanded free contraception.
Yeah.
They demanded parental leave. And those are all demands that I think are super important for us to take up today as well. Because we, demand the right for people to have an abortion, but also the right for people who don't want to have an abortion to have the conditions to be able to parent if they want to.
Exactly.
And the capitalist system that we live under doesn't allow for that, and so I think it's really important to put both of those things together. It was also a movement that was speaking up against the forced sterilization of women of color, in particular, Black, Indigenous, Puerto Rican, and other Latinas, that the state perpetuated of sterilizing folks who didn't want to be sterilized or didn't know they were being sterilized. And even to this day, we see examples of that. Right now, there were sterilizations just, 2 years ago at an ICE detention center in Georgia.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for this movement to, discuss the need for free legal abortion, but also to speak up against, all of these other issues that movements before us also spoke up about. And it's that movement that actually even won the right for us for Roe v. Wade to be legalized, and for us to have the right to an abortion at the federal level. But I think it's also important to mention, the midterms are coming up, and here in New York City, a lot of the Democrats marched in the most recent march that we had. That was quite massive, 20,000 people. And the Democrats every 2 years talk about abortion rights.
Yep.
If you're on any of their fundraising emails, you're getting emails that say, they're about to overturn Roe v. Wade. Can you spare $5 today? Or whatever they say in those emails. And Angelique, you already mentioned this a little bit, but I think it's really important that we flesh out the role that the Democratic Party has had in this, in the issue of abortion rights. They pay a lot of lip service, but have they done their part?
So there was a tweet that Joe Biden made back in 2019 saying, "Roe v. Wade is a law of the land, and we must fight any and all attempts to overturn it. As president, I will codify Roe into law and ensure this choice remains between a woman and her doctor." Okay, yeah, you should also just not use, it's not just cis women who need abortions. But anyway, that's besides the point. And then in 2022, in May 3rd, 2022, he tweeted, "If the court overturns Roe, it will fall on our nation's elected officials at all levels of government to protect a woman's right to choose, and it will fall on voters to elect pro-choice officials this November." Obviously, voting Democrat does not work. We need a mass movement, obviously, I think, led by workers and, folks who, we just need a movement to... SCOTUS is not the answer. The Democrats aren't the answer. And they could have codified, but they didn't. And it's bullshit. And that's just my... where I stand on that. Voting is not the solution. It's not. We can't rely on the Democrats, who just, like you said, pay a lot of lip service, but don't actually do anything. They co-opt our movements and, use it to win votes. And it's disgusting, because there's not been change. And now we're having to deal with the fact that so many folks already in Texas and Oklahoma who can't even access abortion beyond 6 weeks, when most folks don't even realize that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. It's disgusting. So that's where I stand on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, a few things about the Democrats is, on one hand, it's true that they haven't defended abortion rights. For right now, let's be clear. They said, vote for us and we'll defend abortion rights. Vote for us, we'll defend Roe v. Wade. Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned with a Democrat president and a Democrat Congress. So, clearly that strategy, it, is a failure. It didn't work. Clearly. 100%. Because people did do the thing. They voted for the Democrats. They did what the Democrats said was going to, defend abortion rights. And that strategy did not work. Okay? But also, they had a supermajority under the Obama administration. Where is a law that says that we, should have free legal abortion? They didn't pass it. And they've had majorities in the past. And they didn't pass a law codifying Roe because in the end it's very convenient for them to trot it out every 2 years to get votes.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to say that, but also to go further, they've also attacked abortion rights. It's not just that they didn't defend it. They've also attacked it. The Hyde Amendment was supported by Democrats until very recently by Joe Biden, the Hyde Amendment made it so that low-income people could not access abortion through Medicaid. And that was not just a Republican plan. It was a Democrat plan, too. And actually, right now, as we speak, as Roe v. Wade is about to be overturned, Nancy Pelosi is still supporting an anti-choice Democrat in Texas, in the state of Texas, where, SB 8 passed and there's obviously a huge crisis around abortion rights. And so it's not only that the Democrats, don't defend abortion rights, they've actually attacked it with the Hyde Amendment, with anti-choice Democrats in their own ranks. And so I think that what we're about to see is, without a doubt, some Democrats who are even going to take the streets, and they might even say really radical things about it. But in the end, they're going to want to push, our movement into the polls. And so it's super important, to get them elected so that they can, continue to do nothing. And so I think it's super important that our movement fight any kind of co-optation by the Democratic Party. It has to be independent of them. And rather than organizing to move to the polls, we have to organize to be in the streets. We have to organize in our workplaces, talking to our coworkers about the fact that, the Supreme Court is not going to save us. The Democrats are not going to save us, but we are strong. The working class, oppressed people, when we organize, we really are strong. And that's actually why the Democratic Party is so good at what they do, is because we are so strong. They need to have a very sophisticated machine to be able to co-opt us. And we've seen that over and over again. We saw it in the Black Lives Matter movement, where there was a combination of repression, actually, arresting folks, tear gas, that kind of stuff in the streets, combined with trying to move the movement to the polls and promising that they were going to represent the Black Lives Matter movement. And yet, here we are, the Democrats are increasing police budgets all over the country. The Democrats are increasing the military budget all over the country. The Democrats are increasing budgets for ICE to keep, kids in cages. At the border, kids are still in cages, even though, they said they were against that during the Trump administration. So I think it's important for us to note that the Democrats aren't on our side in this struggle, and they're not on our side on anything. They're on the side of the ruling class, they're on the side of the bosses, and they're on the side of stability of the system. And so it's not in their interests, and certainly not something that they want, for us to have a mass movement that begins to realize the fact that we are strong and that we can not only defend Roe, but we can fight for free healthcare. We can fight for parental leave. We can fight for free child care. And so the Democrats, that's their worst fear, is that we recognize our own strength, that we recognize that our strength is not voting for our enemies at the polls. Our strength is not, begging for crumbs at the polls every four years, every 2 years. It's really when we start to mobilize in our communities and in our workplaces, which I think, is super important to notice that that's how abortion rights were won in Argentina, in Colombia, in Ireland, in Mexico. And so that's really, I think, the way forward here. And we're going to have to be really careful and vigilant because the Democrats are absolutely trying to co-opt this movement.
I think we were talking earlier about, all the states that have trigger laws. And, folks in some of those states are preparing to shut down clinics, and how healthcare workers are such a vital component to this movement. And it's true. I think as workers, we have so much labor power, and we just need to realize that. I understand why workers might be hesitant to keep clinics open. I think it's mostly administrative staff who are more inclined to shut things down in order to avoid lawsuits or whatever it is that they're afraid of. But administrative staff don't realize how crucial healthcare workers are. They are useless without healthcare workers. We have so much labor power. What are they without us? People need healthcare services, and we are so much stronger when we connect and we work through things together. As you were saying, Tatiana, we are so strong that the Democratic Party they co-opt our movements because we are so strong. And same thing applies to folks who work at abortion clinics. They need us. And I think we need to realize that we need to talk with our community, with our coworkers, and try to find ways to continue to provide abortions and provide birth control. Because, it starts with abortion, and then folks, the GOP, Republicans, Democrats are going to start to come after birth control, Plan B. You already hear folks talking about that. They want to make IUDs illegal and other contraceptive methods. It's something that we need to recognize. We are very powerful when we work together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super important because healthcare workers, I think, need to organize amongst their coworkers, organize in the community, organize support and solidarity from other sectors, and where possible, defy the bans. Clinics function because healthcare workers provide healthcare. We saw that in the pandemic. We don't need the bosses. They went to their beach houses and they left healthcare workers with trash bags to provide healthcare for the entire population. We don't need them. Clinics function because healthcare workers are there. And so in that sense, the bosses are going to try to shut down the clinics after these, if this ban goes through. And I think that where possible, if possible, healthcare workers should organize amongst themselves with the community to defy the bans. But in that sense, we have to also be very organized in other workplaces. We have to organize, committees of different sectors of workers who can organize walkouts or even strikes if we can. We've seen unions speaking out for abortion rights, and that's really good. Starbucks Workers Union, the ALU, the Amazon Labor Union, but also, the teachers union here in New York City. They were at the march that we just saw on Saturday. But in addition to marching and in addition to statements, we need to really organize our coworkers because the fact is that the majority of people don't want abortion to be illegal. The majority of people are in favor of legal abortion. The question is, how do we organize that majority to take an active role? And our coworkers and our workplaces are really key places that we can do that. And so I think it's super important for us, to organize committees, teachers for abortion rights, healthcare workers for abortion rights, tech workers for abortion rights. Here in New York City, we organize CUNY for abortion rights, which is the biggest public university in New York City, with 500,000 students. These kinds of committees can be the basis for pushing for walkouts, strikes, and mass actions to get people out, to mobilize folks. So I think that that's like a really key way that we can try to build this movement with the strength that, you've been talking about, Angelique. And I also think that the demand that we want to put forward is, on one hand, we want to defend Roe. Roe is not our end goal, but I do think we want to defend it. We want to be so many in the streets that Alito can't put out that fucking bullshit, disgusting opinion that he wrote, But also, that's not our end all be all. We need a law, We need a law that gives us free legal abortion on demand, that's accessible, not one clinic in an entire state. So I think that that's something really important that we have to be pushing for and fighting for. And I think that our unions can play a key role in that movement. I've been super excited to see the unionization wave, to see Starbucks workers unionize and Amazon workers unionize. It seems like, I don't know, like every day there's a new union. And that's so exciting. But, abortion rights are also workers' rights. And so we need to unionize every workplace. We need to fight against anti-union and union-busting practices that we've seen at Amazon, at Starbucks. But we also want those unions to fight for abortion rights. Unions should be fighting groups, fighting organizations for the working class to fight for all of the things that we need. And we do need free legal abortion.
I agree. I think unions are a key component to the abortion rights struggle. It's an intersectional struggle. We should be fighting for the right, like you were saying before, we should be fighting for the right to parent and have access to the resources to parent, and also the right to have an abortion. That's reproductive justice. You can't have one without the other. And so they're intersecting, and unions are at the core of this movement because they are realizing the power that they're, like I was saying, like labor power. And they can demand this right to parent, right to have free, safe, legal abortions. They all connect with one another. So I think you're 100% right. We need unions to be clear and stand with other workers and other, queer, trans folks, immigrant communities, everyone, because this is not just, I think we've predominantly seen a lot of, like you were saying before, a lot of like lip service, a lot of like white feminists. It's not just that. It's international struggle. It's all intersecting, and we need to recognize that we need to fight for one another, and how important unions are to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that sense, it's really important for us also to be clear, we're socialist feminists as well. And a lot of folks in this movement aren't socialist feminists, but, we're going to be in the streets with everyone who wants to fight for abortion rights. But I think it's super important for us to be putting out there also that the reason that, this is even a struggle is because of the patriarchal capitalist system, is because the capitalist system relies on patriarchy and sexism and control over people's bodies in order to have, free childcare for the next generation's workforce, for the next workforce. And so I think for us also it's really important to know to notice and to put forward that, the same folks who want to take away our right to an abortion or who are standing by as our rights are being taken away are the same folks who are busting unions, are the same folks who don't want to provide us a living wage, who are the same folks who are taking away rights from trans people. Mm-hmm. And the people who have the ability to fight against that are working class and oppressed people. The people who are able to really shut down the system are workers. Mm-hmm. And the people who have the ability not just to shut it down, but to make it run, not for the profit of the bosses, but for our own interests as workers, it's also the working class. And so that's why I think it's really powerful, the idea of, workers defying the ban. Because in the end, we make things run. And not the bosses, not the Democrats, not the Republicans. It's the working class and oppressed people that make everything run. And we should run all of society. And there's a name for that, and it's called socialism. And so I think that also this struggle is a struggle that is anti-capitalist, that is socialist feminist.
Yeah, 100%. As a socialist, feminist, abortion provider, biological mother, someone who's had an abortion, I agree with all of that. I also grew up in Texas, El Paso, Texas, a border town, a border city, and just remember my childhood experiences of the maquiladoras, mostly owned by American, wealthy American men, white men. And the reason why they had opened factories in Mexico was because they could, pay the Mexican, mostly women, way less. And, I just remember seeing so many stories about women who were murdered. And it continues to this day. And it's just like you see, I also remember growing up in a very Catholic environment that was very anti-choice, claimed to be pro-life. It was also a military city. And they praised the border patrols and policemen. And it's so sad to kind of see the hypocrisy. I have mad love for El Paso and, the community there, but I just remember always wondering as a kid, why don't they care this much about the women who are working in these factories for these wealthy white American men and, are heavily patrolling the borders and not allowing families who are trying to cross the border for whatever reason to come to the States. And it was just astounding. So I kind of wanted to add that as well, that it's, as a person from Texas, El Paso, Texas, I just, I can't imagine what folks are. I still have family living in Texas. I have little sisters. I have a little brother living in El Paso, Texas, and they might not have access to abortion services. And it's beyond shitty. I don't have words for it. It's really messed up. So.
Yeah, and I think that, the maquilas and the entire imperialist relationship of the United States to Mexico, that uses Mexico and Mexico's working class and land for profit, is, the system that we have to organize against. And also, we are in this moment where I think we also, as socialist feminists, have to look to the socialist feminists and the feminist movement in Mexico, in Argentina, in Colombia, the movements that fought and they won in very Catholic countries, in countries that with very difficult conditions, with a lot of repression often for mobilizing, and they fought and they won. And so in that sense, I think it's really important for us to know that it's possible to fight and win. And that's not just a theoretical idea. We have examples. That's why, in the US, we've been wearing green for abortion rights. It's kind of bringing inspiration from these successful movements in other countries. And that energy and the lessons from that struggle are the lessons we need to take here. The answer to this is not the polls. The answer to this it's not inevitable that this is going to happen and that we just have to accept it and live with it and figure out how to live with it. No. Free, safe, legal abortion on demand and without apology. And we should and we can take the streets, organize our workplaces, organize walkouts, organize strikes until we get it. And that's, I think, the way forward. And that's what the movement in Latin America has shown us. And it's a great inspiration, I think.
100%. I agree with you.